Good evening, everyone. Let me start with a question. Have you ever felt anxious about something that, in hindsight, wasn't as big as it seemed? Of course you have. We all have. Anxiety is that small voice in the back of our minds that tells us we're not ready, that we're not good enough, that something terrible is just around the corner. And the worst part? The more we try to fight it, the stronger it seems to get. So, how do we take the first steps to reduce our anxiety? It starts with understanding one simple truth. Anxiety is not the enemy. Anxiety is a signal. It's your brain saying, hey, something matters to you here. And like any signal, we have a choice. We can ignore it, we can let it control us, or we can use it. Anxiety is something we all experience at different points in our lives. It manifests in various ways, from the slight unease before an important meeting to the overwhelming fear of an uncertain future. The problem isn't that we feel anxious, the problem is how we interpret it. Most people view anxiety as a flaw, an obstacle, or something that must be eliminated. But what if we change that perspective? What if, instead of treating anxiety as an enemy, we saw it for what it really is? A signal. Our brains are wired to keep us safe. Anxiety is simply our mind's way of getting our attention, alerting us that something important is happening. Think about the last time you felt truly anxious. Maybe it was before an interview, before delivering a speech, or during a difficult conversation. What did all of those moments have in common? They mattered to you. Anxiety is an indication that we care, that something is meaningful enough for our brains to push us into a heightened state of awareness. It's not necessarily a sign that something is wrong, it's a sign that something is significant. In the world of biology, anxiety plays a crucial role in our survival. If early humans didn't feel a sense of caution when encountering an unfamiliar environment, they wouldn't have lived long enough to evolve. Anxiety is a response to uncertainty, and uncertainty can sometimes mean danger. But in today's world, that same response is often misplaced. Our modern fears aren't about survival in the wilderness. They're about deadlines, expectations, and what others think of us. The feeling is the same, but the stakes are different. This is why recognizing anxiety as a signal is the first step in managing it more effectively. Imagine driving a car and seeing the check engine light turn on. You have two choices. You can ignore it and hope the problem goes away, or you can acknowledge it and address the issue. The light itself isn't the problem, it's what it represents that matters. Anxiety works the same way. It's an internal warning light trying to direct our attention to something that needs it. Sometimes that something is an external problem, like an upcoming deadline we need to prepare for. Other times it's an internal challenge, like the fear of failure or self-doubt. Either way, the signal is valuable because it's giving us information we wouldn't have otherwise noticed. One of the most common mistakes people make is fighting anxiety as if it's an external enemy. The more we resist it, the stronger it becomes. It's like quicksand. The harder you struggle, the deeper you sink. The key is to acknowledge it, not resist it. When we see anxiety as a signal rather than a threat, we can create space to understand what it's telling us. The workplace is a great example of how anxiety functions as a signal. When an employee feels nervous before a big project, it's often because they care about the quality of their work. If someone experiences stress before a presentation, it's likely because they value how their message is received. In both cases, the anxiety isn't pointless, it's providing feedback. The challenge isn't to eliminate the anxiety, but to ask, what is this trying to tell me? Perhaps it's telling you to prepare more, to practice, or to remind yourself that you're capable. The moment we see anxiety as useful rather than disruptive, we regain control over it. Another important aspect of recognizing anxiety as a signal is learning to differentiate between rational and irrational fears. Not all anxiety is based on reality. Sometimes our minds create scenarios that don't exist. When this happens, we need to pause and evaluate, is this anxiety pointing to a real issue, or is it just my brain overreacting? By assessing it logically, we remove some of its emotional weight and reduce its ability to control us. This shift in perspective is powerful. Instead of spending energy trying to make anxiety disappear, we can channel that energy into understanding what it's telling us. If anxiety is a signal, then the solution isn't avoidance, it's awareness. The more we acknowledge it, the more we can work with it instead of against it. This doesn't mean we won't experience anxiety, it just means it won't control us in the same way. When we stop treating anxiety as an enemy and start using it as information, we begin to realize that it was never working against us. It was simply trying to guide us toward what matters. When anxiety takes hold, it often feels like an overwhelming and vague force. It's a mixture of thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations that seem to take control without a clear reason. This vagueness makes anxiety even more powerful because the human brain struggles with uncertainty. When we don't fully understand something, we tend to assume the worst. That's why one of the most effective ways to begin reducing anxiety is to name it. Putting a label on what you're feeling and identifying its specific cause brings clarity, and clarity diminishes fear. The moment we give anxiety a name, we create a boundary around it. It stops being this massive, intangible presence and instead becomes something specific. It's no longer just an anxiety. It's nervousness about an upcoming presentation, fear of making a mistake in a conversation, or worry about financial stability. The shift is powerful because the brain is much better at problem solving when it understands the issue in concrete terms. End quote. When anxiety remains abstract, it controls us. When we name it, we take back some of that control. Think about how children experience fear in the dark. When a child is lying in bed and sees an unfamiliar shape in the corner of the room, their imagination takes over. It could be a monster. It could be something dangerous. Their heart races, they breathe faster, and they become paralyzed by fear. But the moment a parent turns on the light, the child realizes it was just a chair with a jacket draped over it. The unknown made it terrifying. Naming the object as a chair takes away its power. Anxiety functions in much the same way. When we leave it unidentified, our minds create worst-case scenarios. But when we put a name to it, we strip away some of the fear surrounding it. There is also a psychological reason why naming anxiety helps. Neuroscientists have found that when we label emotions, it reduces their intensity. The part of the brain responsible for emotional reactions, the amygdala, calms down when we engage the logical part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. This means that simply saying, "I feel anxious because I have a deadline tomorrow," helps deactivate the emotional overreaction. It's as if naming anxiety sends a message to the brain, "I see what this is, I understand it." That understanding creates distance between us and the emotion, making it easier to manage. In highly stressful situations, people often say, "I don't even know why I feel this way." That uncertainty magnifies the stress. But if they pause and ask themselves, "What specifically am I anxious about?" they begin to untangle the emotional knot. Maybe it's not the entire situation that's stressful. Maybe it's one particular aspect. Maybe it's not every person's opinion that matters, but the fear of disappointing someone in particular. Anxiety becomes more manageable when we separate the emotion from the assumptions that come with it. One way to practice this is by writing it down. Journaling thoughts, even briefly, forces clarity. Instead of allowing vague feelings to dominate, putting them on paper makes them visible and structured. If someone writes, "I am anxious about failing," they can then follow up with, "What does failing mean to me? What am I specifically afraid of?" Often when people do this, they realize that their fears are exaggerated or not as overwhelming as they seemed in their minds. The act of putting thoughts into words reduces their emotional intensity. Another method is speaking it out loud. Talking to a friend, mentor, or even saying it to oneself in front of a mirror gives anxiety shape. It no longer exists only in the mind, swirling in undefined chaos. Instead, it's expressed, processed, and acknowledged. There's a reason why people often feel better after talking about their worries. Externalizing emotions helps lighten the mental load. Avoidance strengthens anxiety, while naming it weakens it. Avoiding what makes us anxious only reinforces the idea that it is too big to face, but by identifying it, labeling it, and speaking it, we shrink it down to a size we can handle. The more we do this, the more we realize that anxiety was never an unstoppable force. It just felt that way when it remained undefined. When we name it, we reclaim the ability to respond rather than simply react. Anxiety and excitement are remarkably similar in how they feel. The heart races, breathing becomes shallow, hands may shake, and there is a sense of heightened energy. The body doesn't always know the difference between fear and enthusiasm. It simply reacts to a perceived intensity. The distinction between anxiety and excitement is often not in how they feel, but in how the brain interprets them. When we tell ourselves that we are anxious, we reinforce the belief that something is wrong, that we are unprepared, or that we should avoid what is making us feel this way. But when we tell ourselves we are excited, we redirect that same energy towards something empowering rather than something paralyzing. Reframing anxiety as excitement is not about ignoring real concerns. It is about choosing a mindset that allows us to function rather than freeze. The human brain seeks patterns, and when we consistently frame nervousness as a problem, we train ourselves to associate certain experiences with dread rather than opportunity. But when we begin associating those same sensations with excitement, anticipation, or even growth, we reshape our response over time. Instead of feeling like something bad is about to happen, we begin to believe that something meaningful is unfolding. Many of the most high-performing individuals in the world experience the same physical sensations that anxious people do, but they interpret them differently. A professional athlete about to compete, a performer stepping onto the stage, or a leader walking into an important meeting all feel an accelerated heartbeat and a rush of adrenaline, but instead of saying, "I'm nervous," they say, "I'm ready." They train their minds to see their physiological response as a sign of focus, preparation, and engagement, rather than as an indication that something is wrong. The words we use to describe our experience shape how we feel. If someone repeatedly tells themselves, "I'm anxious, I'm so scared, I don't think I can do this," their brain searches for confirmation that the situation is threatening. But if they tell themselves, "This is exciting, this means I care, this energy is helping me," their brain adjusts to view the situation with less fear and more enthusiasm. The shift may seem small, but its impact is significant. Studies have shown that individuals who reframe stress as excitement perform better in high-pressure situations. Their confidence increases, their ability to concentrate improves, and they are more likely to embrace challenges rather than avoid them. One of the most effective ways to apply this shift is through self-talk. When faced with a situation that provokes anxiety, pausing to acknowledge the physical sensations and saying, "I'm excited for this opportunity," rather than "I'm anxious about this moment," helps change the narrative. At first, it may feel unnatural, but over time, the brain learns to associate that response with empowerment rather than fear. Another way to reinforce this mindset is by focusing on the bigger picture. Anxiety tends to make people zoom in on what could go wrong, but excitement allows them to see what could go right. Before stepping into a nerve-wracking situation, asking, "Why is this exciting? What could be gained from this experience?" shifts focus from threat to potential. It allows someone to embrace their energy rather than suppress it. There is also a biological reason this works. When someone is anxious, their body releases stress hormones like cortisol, which prepare them for a fight-or-flight response. But when someone is excited, their body releases dopamine, the chemical linked to motivation, curiosity, and pleasure. The act of reinterpreting nervous energy as excitement can alter the body's hormonal response, leading to a state that feels more manageable and even enjoyable rather than overwhelming. Public speaking provides a common example of how this works in practice. Many people fear public speaking and experience classic symptoms of anxiety before addressing an audience. Their hands get sweaty, their chest tightens, their voice may even shake. The instinct for many is to try and calm down, to force themselves into a state of relaxation. But studies show that attempting to suppress anxiety often backfires. It makes people feel even more anxious because they believe they are not achieving the calmness they think they should have. However, those who tell themselves, "I'm excited to share my ideas," "This is a chance to connect with others," or even just "This energy means I'm ready," tend to perform better. Their confidence increases, their body relaxes more naturally, and their ability to speak with conviction improves. By making this shift regularly, over time, the brain rewires itself to approach situations with more excitement than anxiety. It learns that nervous energy is not a signal to run away, but rather a sign of something important. This creates a powerful loop. The more someone reframes anxiety as excitement, the more confident they become in handling stress, and the more their body and mind adapt to embrace challenges rather than fear them. Anxiety has a way of trapping people in a cycle of overthinking and inaction. It thrives on uncertainty, feeding off hesitation and magnifying fears. The longer someone waits to take action, the more powerful anxiety becomes. The mind starts running in circles, imagining worst-case scenarios and reinforcing self-doubt. One of the simplest yet most powerful ways to break this cycle is to take small actions. Even the smallest step forward can disrupt anxiety's grip and create momentum toward progress. When anxiety arises, it often feels like a signal to pause, analyze, and prepare. The problem is that preparation can quickly turn into procrastination. A person anxious about making a phone call might tell themselves they need to wait for the perfect moment. Someone afraid to start a new project might think they need to do more research before getting started. This pattern makes anxiety stronger because the longer action is delayed, the more intimidating the task becomes. But once a step is taken, no matter how small, anxiety starts to lose its power. Taking action does not mean eliminating fear first. Many people believe they need to feel completely confident before they can begin, but confidence often comes from action, not the other way around. A person who fears public speaking does not become fearless by thinking about it. They become more comfortable by practicing. Even if they start by speaking in front of just one person, action leads to experience, experience builds competence, and competence reduces anxiety. A small step forward can be as simple as writing down a plan, sending a message, or practicing for just a few minutes. If someone feels overwhelmed by a large task, breaking it down into micro steps makes it more manageable. Instead of focusing on writing an entire report, they can start with a rough outline. Instead of committing to an hour at the gym, they can start with 10 minutes. These small actions tell the brain, I am capable of moving forward, which shifts the focus from fear to progress. The brain also has a psychological bias toward action. Research shows that when people take even minor steps toward their goals, their motivation increases. This is because action triggers a feedback loop. When a person accomplishes something, their brain releases dopamine, a chemical associated with motivation and reward. That dopamine boost makes them feel good, reinforcing the desire to take another step. This is why athletes who stick to a workout routine find it easier to stay motivated over time. Their initial effort leads to a positive feeling, making them more likely to continue. The same principle applies to any situation where anxiety is holding someone back. Anxiety tends to amplify the unknown. It makes people focus on what could go wrong, what they might fail at, or what others might think. But when a person takes action, the unknown becomes known. Instead of worrying about whether they will perform well in a new role, they take the first step, showing up, asking questions, and learning. Instead of wondering if a conversation will be awkward, they engage, realizing that it was never as difficult as their mind made it seem. Each step taken removes some of the mystery and fear surrounding the situation. Anxiety exists because we care. It arises in moments that matter to us, in situations where the outcome is meaningful. No one feels anxious about things that don't matter. This is why people experience anxiety before an important meeting, but not while brushing their teeth. Why they feel nervous about a big conversation, but not about what socks to wear. Anxiety is often proof of deep investment in something, whether it's our work, our relationships, our goals, or how we are perceived. Recognizing this shifts anxiety from something negative to something useful. It means we are engaged, that we have something at stake, and that we want to do well. There is power in understanding that anxiety is linked to values. If a person feels nervous before giving a presentation, it's because they care about delivering their message effectively. If someone feels anxious before making a life decision, it's because the choice has real weight. Anxiety is a signal of significance, not necessarily of danger. This distinction is critical. Instead of seeing anxiety as something to eliminate, it can be reframed as an indicator of passion, dedication, and purpose. High performers in every field feel anxiety. A surgeon before an operation, an athlete before a competition, an artist before showcasing their work, all feel the same rush of nervous energy. The difference is that they recognize their anxiety as a sign of investment, not as a reason to stop. Anxiety is a form of mental alertness, sharpening focus and increasing readiness. It prepares the mind to pay attention, to stay sharp, and to rise to the occasion. When viewed this way, anxiety transforms from a limitation into a tool. Anxiety is most overwhelming when it feels like it is working against us, but it loses its power when it is channeled into action. The nervous energy that makes hands shake is the same energy that keeps someone sharp in a negotiation. The racing thoughts that make someone doubt themselves before a big decision can also push them to carefully weigh their options and think through details others might miss. A writer's anxiety about their work isn't a sign to quit, it's a sign that they care deeply about their craft. That care is a driving force There's also something revealing about what causes anxiety. Often it highlights areas of personal growth. People tend to feel the most anxious in areas where they have high expectations for themselves. A new leader might feel anxious about their ability to lead because they want to be effective and respected. A student might feel anxious about a test because they take pride in their academic performance. If someone experiences anxiety about a creative project, it often means they see real potential in their work. Anxiety can be used as a compass, pointing toward the things that matter most. Many people assume they would be happier without anxiety, but a life without anxiety would be a life without deep investment in anything. People who never feel anxiety might not be pushing themselves, striving for something greater, or stepping outside their comfort zones. The most fulfilling experiences, chasing a dream, building relationships, making meaningful contributions, all come with some level of uncertainty, which naturally triggers anxiety. But that's not a reason to avoid them. In fact, it's the opposite. It's a reminder that those experiences matter. This is why reframing anxiety as a sign of purpose can be so powerful. The presence of anxiety isn't a signal to stop, it's a sign that something meaningful is happening. Instead of wishing it away, the challenge is to use it as motivation. When anxiety arises, the key is to ask, what does this tell me about what I value? Often, it means something important is at stake, and that realization alone can turn anxiety into a source of drive rather than doubt. Take small actions to disrupt overthinking. When we find ourselves in a spiral of overthinking, it often feels as though we are endlessly running in circles, with no solution or resolution in sight. Overthinking can hold us captive, trapping our minds in a loop of hypothetical scenarios, potential outcomes, and worries about things beyond our control. This mental trap not only exhausts us, but can prevent us from making any real progress in our lives. In these moments, it's crucial to remind ourselves that the solution is not found in thinking harder, but in taking small, purposeful actions. Overthinking thrives on inaction. The more time we spend thinking about something without taking concrete steps, the more room we give our minds to overanalyze every possible angle of a situation. We ponder all the possible risks, the potential for failure, and whether we are making the right decision. But the truth is, overthinking does not create clarity. It only amplifies our fears and insecurities. It makes mountains out of molehills, turning small concerns into massive, seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The mind begins to grow louder, and in trying to control everything through thought, we end up feeling more out of control. One of the best ways to combat overthinking is to focus on taking small actions, even when those actions feel insignificant in comparison to the mental gymnastics going on in your head. These small actions work like a release valve, gently letting off some of the pressure that builds up when we remain stuck in our thoughts. When we take action, no matter how simple, we break the cycle of rumination and create forward momentum, which has the effect of soothing our anxiety and shifting our focus from worry to solution. This is not to say that every action will instantly resolve the complexity of the issue at hand. However, each step taken, no matter how small, slowly shifts the focus from overthinking to practical problem solving. Small actions provide an immediate and tangible way to address our fears. For example, if you are overthinking about a job application, instead of rereading the job description 100 more times to make sure you meet every qualification, taking small steps like drafting the first sentence of your cover letter or organizing your resume might give you a feeling of accomplishment and clarity. These small steps reduce the overwhelming feeling of facing the entire process at once and break it down into manageable parts. When we start with something small, it sets us on the path of creating a sequence of actions that will lead to a sense of progress and completion. Each action builds confidence and reduces the scope of the anxiety attached to the task. Overthinking can also cause us to feel paralyzed because we perceive the task at hand as something monumental or too complex to tackle all at once. This sense of scale only adds to our feelings of inadequacy or fear of failure. Taking small actions helps us deconstruct large challenges into smaller, more approachable components. Rather than trying to address everything all at once, we can focus on one step at a time. Each small action is an act of trust in ourselves and our ability to handle what comes next. These incremental movements also provide us with ongoing feedback, helping us understand whether we need to make adjustments or continue with our current course of action. In addition to disrupting overthinking, taking small actions can help us gain clarity. Often overthinking is driven by a lack of certainty. We want to control the outcome or understand everything before we move forward. But the irony is that waiting for total certainty rarely leads to greater confidence. Instead, it creates stagnation. The act of taking small actions leads to natural clarity because it allows us to test our assumptions and engage with reality. If something isn't working, we can pivot, but if we never start, we'll never know. Moreover, small actions serve to gradually change our relationship with fear. It's natural to feel anxious or hesitant before taking action, especially when we're unsure of the results. But by moving forward anyway, we build resilience and learn to cope with uncertainty in a healthy, constructive way. With each small step, our fear begins to lose its grip. Over time, we develop more trust in the process and in ourselves. Rather than allowing fear to dictate our actions, we can slowly shift our mindset to one of curiosity and exploration, knowing that even mistakes can teach us valuable lessons. Sometimes, when we face overwhelming decisions or life changes, the simplest thing we can do is just take a breath and commit to one small action. This could be something as simple as scheduling an appointment, reaching out for help, or even just writing down your thoughts. Doing this gives our brain something concrete to focus on and shifts our attention away from the vortex of overthinking. These moments of grounding in reality remind us that we are capable and allow us to gain perspective on the problem at hand. Another benefit of taking small actions is that they offer a sense of control. When we are paralyzed by overthinking, we feel as though everything is spiraling beyond our grasp, but taking small, manageable steps restores a sense of agency. It may not feel like much, but controlling small pieces of the process allows us to regain a sense of power in our decisions, reminding us that while we cannot control every outcome, we can control our actions. Rather than trying to eliminate overthinking altogether, it's more realistic and effective to focus on managing it. Small actions don't necessarily silence the noise of overthinking immediately, but they disrupt the thought patterns, allowing us to engage with the present moment and reframe our approach to the task. This shift helps turn anxiety into action, enabling us to step out of the spiral and into a space where solutions start to emerge naturally. The growth happens when you take the first step. It is often easy to get trapped in the cycle of overthinking, worry, and fear, but all growth in life begins with the courage to move, however small that move might seem. Taking that initial step can feel like a monumental task when weighed down by the pressures of anxiety, fear, and self-doubt. But it is precisely by stepping forward that these feelings are overcome and their power diminished. It's important to understand that growth does not necessarily require huge leaps of action. Rather, it's the act of moving forward, no matter how small, that marks the beginning of progress. When we experience anxiety, it often feels as though we are faced with an insurmountable challenge, a mountain too high to climb, or an obstacle too overwhelming to overcome. The mind can fixate on all the reasons why moving forward might be difficult or risky. What if it doesn't work out? What if I fail? What if others judge me? These doubts can feel all-encompassing, keeping us stagnant and preventing any action from being taken. However, growth comes from breaking through these moments of paralysis. It is often the fear itself that keeps us stuck in place, and by confronting that fear, we push the boundary of what is possible for us. The first step often doesn't need to be perfect or even clear. It just needs to be taken. Many times, what prevents us from moving forward is the overwhelming need for certainty. We want to know all the answers, see the clear path ahead, and have every detail laid out before us. However, the truth is that the path toward growth is rarely illuminated from the start. There is an element of trust that comes with making that first step, trusting that once the movement is made, the next step will reveal itself. It may not always be obvious, and sometimes we may stumble, but each action builds momentum. Furthermore, the first step often takes us into unfamiliar territory, which can naturally provoke fear or anxiety. We fear the unknown, but it's in that very unfamiliarity that we are most likely to learn and grow. When we are forced out of our comfort zones, we become more resourceful, creative, and adaptable. These qualities are crucial in personal and professional growth. What feels like an uncomfortable challenge is often the very thing that fosters resilience and confidence. The more we push past those initial feelings of anxiety and fear, the more we realize that we are capable of much more than we initially thought. Anxiety is a natural response to this shift into new territory, signaling that something important is at stake. Instead of seeing anxiety as an enemy to be eliminated, we can start to understand it as a guide pointing us toward areas of growth. When we push through anxiety, we develop our courage. We show ourselves that we are capable of moving forward, even when the way is not fully clear. The first step is powerful because it is the action that transforms fear into action, confusion into clarity, and uncertainty into a path. The key to all of this is the ability to make the decision to take action regardless of the emotional turbulence that might accompany it. The challenge lies in breaking the cycle of overthinking, because overthinking traps us in endless scenarios of what-ifs that never lead to tangible progress. Anxiety and overthinking are tied together, often feeding each other. But once you begin to act, that cycle can be disrupted. Movement shifts. Focus away from worries about failure and moves it towards solution and progress. Even small actions like writing down one step you can take or deciding on one thing to do next can begin to break the cycle of paralysis and invite clarity into the situation. It is in these moments of doing that we discover that the world doesn't come to an abrupt end when we make a move. In fact, each step forward invites new possibilities and invites further growth. When we commit to the idea that growth is found in taking the first step, we liberate ourselves from the pressures of having everything figured out or fearing the consequences of failure. The goal is not perfection, but progress. We must be gentle with ourselves and allow space for the process. Every forward motion, no matter how small, contributes to the overall journey, gradually propelling us into new experiences, new insights, and greater capacity to handle life's challenges. Growth is cumulative. It may not be immediately obvious, but even seemingly small or insignificant steps contribute to a larger transformation over time. These initial actions establish new patterns, and over time they shift our mindset and behavior toward embracing progress rather than fearing it. At some point, the act of taking a first step becomes easier because we realize the truth that growth happens with action. Anxiety can still appear as a companion, but instead of stopping us, it signals the places where we have the opportunity to grow the most. Now, will anxiety ever completely go away? No. But should it? Also no. Anxiety, when harnessed, is a reminder that we care. It's an opportunity to grow. And growth only happens when we take the first step. So the next time anxiety whispers, instead of shutting it out, listen, name it, reframe it, act on it, and watch how, step by step, it starts working for you, not against you. Thank you.